special episode on Mr. Modi's speech today in Sydney, which clearly enthralled his audience by discussing its contents, both those elements of it which people admired as well as those which caused a certain amount of concern. MJ Akbar, let's now come to something a little different to what we've been talking about. Mr. Modi seems to have set a pattern or established a tradition of addressing large gatherings of Indian expatriates on his major trips abroad. Do you believe that he's using NRIs as a force multiplier for Indian foreign policy and for amplifying his wider message to the world?
Yes, but in a slightly different context. The principal driving force of his foreign policy is the economy. That is absolutely the one motivation that you can see. I mean, you can divide his foreign policy, emerging foreign policy, into two parts. One, how to get economic growth, and therefore to concentrate on those nations of the world with which partnership will bring India immediate and even long-term economic benefits. The second part, which is the security element, which is how to protect the nation from those areas of the world which become sanctuaries for terrorism, and because you can't get a prosperity without peace. So peace for India and prosperity by engaging. Now in this context, the NRI becomes a very important, as you say, and I think you put it very well, a force multiplier for this engagement. I do also want to make one point, if I may, that one of the things that Modi has, the Prime Minister has said very publicly, is that he is very impressed with Nehru's effort to build a scientific temperament and encourage a scientific temperament in thinking. And that links in with what Dipankar was saying and what he said again, that yes, gods and goddesses are right. He does not abandon India's past, particularly its religious past and its cultural past. But he says that the economy, we have to move on from there. And that's why he quotes Swami Vivekananda on that issue. He has also said in the past that, before we think of temples, let's build toilets. And that was again a part of his theme. So this is part of an overall scheme, a part of an overall matrix in which he is trying to rebuild a nation which he thinks has gone a little flat of late.
Abhishek Singhvi, the last part of MJ Akbar's answer has deflected me from the conversation I wanted to have, because I think what he said is so controversial. I want your opinion. He said that Mr. Modi is trying to build a scientific temper, and he interpreted Mr. Modi's comments quoting Vivekananda in that light. I recall the same Mr. Modi in Bombay at the inauguration of the Reliance Hospital claiming that Ganesh was proof that we had plastic surgery in ancient times, that the birth of Karan was proof that India was masters of genetic science in ancient times. Do you see these two Mr. Modis as the same? The one that MJ Akbar spotted today and the one that we heard at the Reliance Hospital? Or is this a sort of schizophrenia?
Well, remember, Karan, schizophrenia is also the same person always. So it could well be the same, because Mr. Modi does lapse, and this could be a lapse into a kind of over starry-eyed ancient India theory, which actually ends up making a bit of a mockery of India. India has much to be proud of, a legacy, but we don't have to mix up mythology with facts and history. And I think you're one of the few people who had a discussion on this, and we've said what we wanted to say at that discussion. But I must say this, that in principle, nobody can object to harnessing the power of the NRIs. I have in fact a conflict of interest, because this whole project on the diaspora concept was on the basis of a report done by my father, and I thought it was a great work irrespective of the politics behind it. But the point is that there is always an element of or a trace in this, that the projection, if to harness it for India's worth, no problem. But how much it is to harness it in a presidential form for Mr. Modi himself as a human being, as a person, that's where the conflict arises. Because it is very much along with this clear that Mr. Modi is slowly trying to convert this whole thing into a presidential system of governance, and is projecting himself fully.
Okay, I take your point. You're actually making a point about Mr. Modi's self-projection, and you've moved on beyond the use of NRIs, but I want to come back to the use of NRIs, and I want to quote Salman Khurshid. because he commented on this subject again yesterday. He said, addressing NRIs will not help. India will benefit if he, meaning Modi, influences American leaders and American people. But I put it to you, didn't the huge gathering at Madison Square Garden, where there were some 50 congressmen and senators present, send out a powerful message both to the White House and Capitol Hill? And similarly, won't the gathering today at Sydney send out similar messages to the world? And if I'm right in saying they do, then isn't that one way of influencing governments and leaders without brutally doing it in a blunt way?
Undoubtedly. I think Congress carping about this is really just shows that they don't really know how to question or conduct some kind of sensible opposition politics. I think Mr. Modi is doing two things. Reaching out to the NRIs is also one way of reaching out to domestic audiences, very clearly. But it's undeniable that he is trying to use the presence of large Indian communities in Australia, the US, other countries where he's going to go, as you know, and the success that the Indian community has made of itself as some kind of a force multiplier. That phrase you use is correct. I think that this becomes a method to influence. We saw that, I mean, Manmohan Singh's government did it as well, right? During the negotiations for the nuclear deal, for example, the Indian community was deployed fully. So governments have been doing this in the past. I think Mr. Modi is perhaps trying to raise it to a new level. But I think one part which left me a little cold, a little bit worried, was the idea that India should become a country which exports doctors and scientists. You have an acute shortage of teachers, medical professionals, nurses, doctors in India. And none of the projects that Mr. Modi wants to implement of ending poverty can be accomplished unless you have a robust publicly provided health system. And if you're going to be exporting doctors, and if that's going to be the raison d'etre of your economic policy, I think you have a problem there.
Absolutely, particularly when you need them yourself. Dipankar Gupta, let me quote to you from Bob Doherty, writing in The Guardian and reprinted in The Hindu on Sunday. The article in The Hindu was headlined, "From Outcast to Rockstar." And this is what it said in its last paragraph. However unlikely it may once have seemed, Mr. Modi is one of the most popular figures at this G20, a leader others want to see and be seen with. Isn't that a phenomenal achievement for a Prime Minister in less than 6 months?
It's a phenomenal achievement, no matter which way you look at it. Not just 6 months, the way he came to power, the way he became the Prime Minister. Who would have said a year and a half back or 2 years back? At least I wouldn't have said at that time that this man would be Prime Minister very soon. Probably in the distant future, but not this fast. So I must say that's full marks to Mr. Modi and his ability to galvanize people. When he goes abroad, it's quite right. I think this point was made by Siddharth, that he's actually addressing the Indian audience as well. The Modi has something in his favor here, because the two major communities that are from India that are abroad are the Sikhs and the Gujaratis. And I think the Gujaratis are delighted that Modi is around, because he gives them the kind of fillip they've been waiting for all this time. Manmohan Singh could have done it with the Sikhs, but he just lost it. And therefore that was an opportunity gone. And in this case, I find that Modi is, when he talks about India's development to a rapt crowd of Indians, who in America they came from New Jersey, in Australia I don't know from where, the idea that India is going to be economic power and not just going to export low quality items is something that is attractive not only to them, but most of all to people in India. We do want a different kind of economy, and not one that actually flogs informal labor and low wage labor, and we move on to a higher kind of economic production. This is something India has been waiting for 60 years, and I am happy at least he's talking about it. But as I said to you earlier, this is another tangible on which Modi has to deliver. By the way, when it comes to self-aggrandizement, who can beat India is Indira.
Oh, yes, that's absolutely true. But that was a generation or two ago, when something Mr. Modi and his party derided. It's very odd that they should be accusing them of doing the same thing themselves.
All right.
One of the ironies of history.
You do believe in Sanjay Baru and Natwar Singh?
I beg your pardon, can you finish that incomplete thought?
It has resurfaced in recent times as well.
Okay.
I just said that Sanjay Baru and Natwar Singh seem to suggest that there's a continuity.
Let's leave that aside. It's a bit of a red herring for this show. Kamal Sibal, how much of the pull that draws people in such large numbers to Allphones Arena or to Madison Square Garden is Mr. Modi's charismatic personality and his powerful rhetoric, and how much of that pull is just sheer good organization. I don't mean to deride it, but an event is made both by the personality the event centers around and the management of the event. And I'm asking you, which is more important, the personality or the management?
I think both. I mean, you can have excellent management, but if you have a person who lacks personality, is not going to go anywhere. And of course, if you can have very charismatic personality, but if there is chaos and there is mismanagement, then obviously the effect will be that much less. So in this case, I would say both have combined very well, but I want to make one or two points in this connection. One is that his message is not partisan. He's not playing politics in terms of the domestic audience. He's sending a very positive message. There is no sense of victimhood. It was said earlier, you know, there have been instances in history where charismatic people, there have been bad examples, but in this case, there's no sense of victimhood. He's not asking anything from the world. He's not saying that we are poor, you must give more aid, you must give more assistance, that there must be less protectionism, etc., etc. He's not going down that road at all. He's talking about what India can do, what India must do, what India must contribute. It's a very positive message.
Okay.
So therefore, I don't have those kind of concerns and fears that have been expressed. And finally, you know, the NRI community, from my experience abroad over a long period of time, they have been very contemptuous of India, disillusioned with India, anti-India in the sense that they have been complaining bitterly about lack of direction in India. And there's a huge change now, where
Absolutely.
the NRI community is beginning to feel a sense of pride, and indirectly, in fact, they are going to be the vehicle for more interest in India from the countries in which they live, more investment, more technology transfers, more business, more everything. I think it is very good to involve them.
I want to go back to Abhishek Singh, give you what is undoubtedly going to be the last question on this particular show. I'm going to once again quote Bob Doherty from The Guardian. This is what he writes. Once the outcast, Mr. Modi arrived at the G20 on Friday as the political rock star of the summit. I know Mr. Modi is not your favorite Indian politician, but can you accept that Mr. Modi has done something in terms of attracting international attention, both from fellow presidents and prime ministers as well as the international press, that other previous Indian prime ministers hadn't done right up till, I suppose, Mrs. Gandhi? Indira Gandhi, I mean.
Karan, first of all, it is not good for a Prime Minister, past, current or in the future, to be either a outcast or a rock star. A Prime Minister should not aspire to be either, should not allow himself to be either, and should not become either. Secondly, as I said, certainly there is a very, very great novelty value. He has been a Prime Minister for less than 6 months. No amount of anti-incumbency has set in, not even a minimal amount. He is a great communicator, and therefore you have to really judge him in the 18th month period onwards. So there is still time to wait, but yes, I would not deny that you are partly right, saying that he has caught the attention of wherever he has gone, both for the novelty value and for the fact that he is a good communicator. It's the deliverables and the performances which will matter soon, because in these settings, the chances of saying anything less than statesmanlike or something less than unacceptable is very little.
All right. I will leave you with the last word. You're the opposition. Maybe sometimes the opposition should have the last word, even if they don't have the last say. My thanks to all my guests for joining me.